Okay, so let's be realistic. At some point, I think most boys want to be James Bond. And I'm no Daniel Craig, but I still got inspired by the opening scene of Skyfall and tried to kind of recreate it, more used it as inspiration to make my own scene. So Skyfall, obviously DP'd by Roger Deakins, and I think this scene is particularly iconic. That's why I used it as inspiration for creating my own scene. I think one thing to take from this is an idea you've probably already heard. Good artists copy, great artists steal. And I think the key to stealing is to see something you like, try and emulate it, but really use it as inspiration to create your own thing. So for this exercise, I wanted to create different moods, try and replicate different genres in the same scene. Part of that you're going to see is the color grading. Part of that is definitely the props, the action and the actor, but all of them use light to help create the mood. So for this scene, I didn't have a window at the end of my corridor, so I had to kind of make one. Luckily, the whole background is out of focus, so I used a large mirror and stuck strips of gaffer tape across it. And then I set up my 60X to bounce into that and back towards camera. So with the 60X, I rigged it up on a C-stand in one of the rooms next to the corridor, using the arm to angle it up into the corridor, pointing it back down towards the mirror. I used the barn doors to cut off a lot of the light, so it's just spilling on the mirror. I don't think it totally works as a window, but as it's so out of focus and so far back from the main action of the scene, hopefully I get away with it. I think one of the key differences between the corridor scene in Skyfall and the corridor scenes that I've created is how much bigger the corridor is in the Bond film. I think it's something that bigger budgets bring that get you to that cinematic look, is just having larger spaces. And those larger spaces allow you to have more depth of action and depth of focus. One of the other big differences you might notice is the color of the walls. In a lot of household settings, you'll run into this problem that all the walls are white, and therefore whatever light you put into the scene bounces around and it's really difficult to control it. A lot of bigger movies will either find locations without white walls or spend time painting them so they're a darker color in order to be able to control that light and more easily create a moody look, as in these scenes from Skyfall. So the 60X was my key light, but I also wanted to put in a side light at the front, so when I hit my mark, it would give me that nice streak of light across my face, like the Bond scene. However, unlike the Bond scene, I decided to go for a more traditional Rembrandt light, which you can see from the telltale triangle of light below the eye here. For this, I used a single Nanlite Pavotube 30X in its egg crate. I also used a cutter to block most of it off, leaving only the top 6 inches or so visible. The great thing about the Pavotubes is that they're just already so soft. The diffusion in them is great, so even just leaving that little bit of light still gives you a little bit of soft texture that's complementary to the skin. I set up camera marks and focus using a wireless follow focus, and in the process realised how difficult it is for actors to hit marks without looking down. Sorry actors if I was ever mean to you for missing your mark. I filled the corridor with smoke. Here you can see me moving around in slow motion, wafting that smoke around. And finally, I got into costume. Had to remember how to tie a tie because as a filmmaker, that's not something I do very often. I went for a few different variations here. I was especially interested in trying to create a film noir mood, so I'd initially planned to grade this as black and white. But I also wanted to experiment using practicals in the setup, including a torch and a lighter as sources of light. For this lighter one, I killed the Pavotube and just used the lighter to light up my face, which I think gives an interesting moody look. For the torch shots, a great tip that I saw from the BTS from some films is that often with a torch, they'll get someone with a little bounce by the camera to return some of the torchlight onto the actor's face. For me, I just clipped up a 5-in-1 reflector, the white side, onto my tripod and shone the torch onto that. Well, first thing to say here is that I'm definitely not a colorist, but I thought it might be quite useful to look at the post-production anyway. So first thing I've done is created an adjustment layer with a crop. I shot this natively at 2:4:1 on the Komodo, but just to make sure that none of my other adjustment layers below affect the area outside of the image, I'm putting the crop on the first adjustment layer here. With this second adjustment layer, I've added a conversion LUT. This is the one from Red, and I just mostly use medium contrast and soft highlight roll-off. On my third adjustment layer here, I'm using Film Convert Nitrate to do the bulk of the color work. I think this is a great plugin and it's really easy to use and gets really satisfying results. You can change the film stock. I often go with a Kodak 5207 Vis 3, which I think is a really satisfying look. You can adjust the film chroma and film luma, so that's essentially how much film style colorings you want and how much film style contrast. You can also change all the grain settings as you see here. I shoot a lot of my work using Spencer Sakurai's Roger That LUT as a in-camera monitoring LUT. I find it particularly helpful because it just adds a little bit of contrast to the image, but also brings your image down by 2 stops, which helps you to expose to the right, getting cleaner shadows. I'm putting it back in here on the penultimate adjustment layer, just to get a little bit of that flavor that the LUT added whilst I was shooting. Finally, in this bottom adjustment layer, I'm adding just a little bit of directional blur, putting a mask on here so it only affects the outer edges of the image and really upping the mask feather as well. I quite like this look, adding a little bit of a blur vignette just to tweak those outside edges. This is a particularly popular look in camera at the moment, shooting with anamorphic lenses. I think if you look at something like Greg Fraser's work on the Batman, where he specifically had those lenses tweaked to get interesting vignetting and fall off of focus towards the corners of the image. But this is a way to emulate some of that flavor in post when shooting with spherical lenses. With the film noir look, I'm again using film nitrate, but I've gone with a different film stock to get that traditional black and white filmic look, and in this case it's the Ilford ILD 400. And you can see with this one as well that I've slightly missed my mark, so I put on a little unsharp mask here just to add a little sharpening on the face. And then I'm going in and keyframing that just to make sure it's affecting only my face. With this final one, where we're using the lighter as a practical, I found that the lighter itself wasn't quite bright enough. It wasn't giving quite enough level to my face. So in post, I've come in and put a tiny mask on here just to up the exposure on the right side of my face, augmenting the light coming from the lighter and really amplifying that Rembrandt light. So I think exercises like these are great practice. It's great to just get your gear out, be inspired, and try something new. It means that next time you're on set, maybe you'll be a little bit faster with your gear, setting everything up. It means that maybe you already have some pre-existing ideas of shots or how to light things. I think it gives you a good perspective of what other people are doing on set. For example, how difficult it is for actors to hit their marks. Overall, I hope you found this interesting, and I hope it's inspired you to go and steal, to be inspired by other films and try recreating shots from them, or maybe even taking ideas that you see in them and making something of your own. Thanks very much for watching.